Hi, I just wanted to talk to you for a little bit about how to avoid using biased media when you are doing your research, especially the stuff that we would call fake news. So like I've mentioned before, with the internet, it makes it so easy to do research today, so much easier than having to go to a physical library and use only books, magazines, that sort of stuff. But the downside of that kind of ease of information spread is that it also makes it a lot easier for misinformation to be spread to people, especially through things like social media. People a lot of times will see a story that's been published by something that claims to be a news source. They'll read it, say, oh, that must be true, and then immediately spread it to other people without questioning where this information is really coming from, and if that source has a particular agenda that it's trying to accomplish. What ends up being really dangerous is this thing that we do. It's called incestuous amplification. And I mean, that just sounds really bad, right? But it's this tendency we have to only kind of believe information that fits with our beliefs and then reject anything that doesn't fit with those beliefs. And the effect of that is that when you're not getting competing information and you're only kind of choosing articles or sources that fit with your own beliefs, it just makes you more extreme in those beliefs, whether they are accurate or not. I mean, think about this reality we have today where there are people who believe that the earth is flat, right? The only way that that notion continues to exist is that there's a group of people, hopefully a really small group of people, who believe that that's true, and they keep kind of spreading information between them, anything that they find that supports this idea that the earth is flat, right? So again, the internet can be really dangerous when it comes to using information when you're trying to write a paper. The worst thing you could do would be to use a source that is completely made up, right? Or really biased in one direction or the other. So what I have pulled up here is, I think, a really good resource. This is called the Media Bias Chart. This is version 6.0, so it's the newest version that was just published in June. But they periodically update this thing as new sources kind of get added to this list. But again, you can kind of pull this up on your own at any time, and I think it's a really good way to check how reliable a certain news source might be. Like I've talked about before, when you're doing research for a college assignment, the absolute best information you can get is going to be an academic article found through a library database. That stuff is going to be written by experts, and you have a lot less chance of getting unreliable information that way. And the thing is, those types of articles are going to look a lot different than any sort of news article that you see on this chart. But let's say that you find an article through a web search, and it sounds like it's really relevant to something you're discussing in a paper, and you kind of question whether you should use it or not. This chart lays out some of these sources that you should watch out for versus these ones that are going to be better to use for a source for a paper or some other assignment. So the ones obviously at the extreme left and the extreme right are going to be really bad types of sources that you should not use when writing a paper. And again, when we're talking about left and right, this kind of bar up here, we're talking about political leanings, right? So a source that leans left is going to be more liberal, whereas a source that's more right is going to be more conservative. So some of these ones that are really on the extreme margins here, those ones you'll read the headline and you should be able to tell almost immediately that they're not good sources to use. So InfoWars is a prime example. That's basically a conspiracy theorist site. They post articles saying things like the Sandy Hook shooting never happened, like questioning things that are actual reality. So ones like that, we have National Enquirer on here. I mean, this thing that you buy at the grocery store checkout that has all these weird stories in it, obviously those are bad. I think the ones that are a little bit more dangerous, honestly, are these ones that are more toward the middle, because they seem more like legit news sources, but a lot of times they still contain quite a bit of bias. Again, there's some both on the right and the left here. Probably one you've heard a lot about is Fox News, right? The articles that they post tend to lean more right. So they are more often going to, post with a conservative perspective in mind, right? Whereas a source like MSNBC is known for being more liberal, and that they kind of promote a liberal perspective more often, right? I think these are dangerous because sometimes they seem pretty neutral. But I think with these, you always have to question, are they leading me in a particular direction? Is this without bias? So those are ones in particular to watch out for. What's good is that we have a lot that are in the reliable category, right? We have a bunch listed here. These are the ones that are considered most safe to use. And again, if you pull this up on your computer, you can make these look bigger. But the idea is that no media source is going to be completely free of bias or completely neutral, because these stories are all produced by human beings, and human beings are not without bias. Whether we want to admit it or not, we all have certain biases about things. But again, some sources do better than others. Like most of the ones in this category here, they will acknowledge if they have bias and try to provide multiple perspectives so that you're getting a complete version of the story rather than just one particular version of it, right? So again, this source is good to refer to if you're not sure whether a publication is legit or not. So let's look at an example. I actually want to pull up a couple of pictures for you here. So what I want to point out is that how the media tells a particular story drastically impacts how we understand the situation as viewers. We're not there, so we're going by the story that we're being told. And a lot of times these news stories are stating basically the same information, but it's how they portray it that makes a big difference and may cause us to see a situation slightly or very differently based on the publication that it's coming from. So some of you guys probably remember this incident that happened, I guess 2 years ago now. I think it was January of 2019. But it was this incident that occurred at the Lincoln Memorial, where we had these two converging groups. They were not connected in any way, but it was this group of Catholic high school kids and this group of Native American protesters. They just happened to be at the Lincoln Memorial at the same time. So this situation got very tense. There was no violence committed, but it was just a very sort of tense, loud situation, and lots of news sources were reporting on this incident. Many of those sources depicted these kids as being aggressive and hostile toward this Native American group, and kind of shaming them for their actions. So let's imagine that we know nothing of this situation except what we see in this picture. So let's analyze what we're seeing here. Really, we're looking in the face of this kid. He's wearing a Make America Great Again hat. There's some kids in the background who also have these same hats. If I had to describe his expression here, I would say he's smirking. To me, he looks arrogant, like he's taunting the Native American guy in front of him. There's a kid in the background here. He looks like he's yelling something. The kid next to him is videoing the whole thing, almost like egging him on, that sort of thing. And then we have this Native American guy who seems to be outnumbered with all these kids surrounding him, right? This was kind of like the central image that was spread a million times when this incident occurred, right? And these kids were labeled as aggressors in the situation. So let me show you another picture of this same incident. Let me see if I can make it bigger. Probably around the same moment as the previous picture was taken. I think that if I just saw this picture, I would not have the same impression of the situation as I did of the previous picture. You still see the kid, you still see the Native American guy, you still see people in the background, some wearing Native American or Make America Great Again hats. But to me, the kid doesn't look as aggressive or arrogant here. To me, it looks like these two men are on more unequal footing, right? And honestly, you could make the argument that in this picture, the Native American guy looks more like the aggressor in the situation because he seems to be beating the drum very close to this kid's face. I get a different impression of what's happening here because I'm getting a different perspective through this picture, right? So this shows that the media has a lot of power in how they make you see a situation, right? Let's look at a couple of headlines here from this incident, right? So this one I got from Fox News. It says it's an opinion piece, but the headline is Covington Catholic High School students smeared by mainstream media lies. Don't expect an apology. In this one, it makes it sound like these Catholic high school kids were the victims here, right? They were smeared by mainstream media. We get the impression that they were treated badly. Something to mention here, and I think it's really important, is that after this incident was first reported, it came out that there was this third group also at the Lincoln Memorial. This group referred to as the Black Israelites, and they were actually inciting a lot of the aggression. They were yelling things at these high school boys, homophobic and racial slurs, stuff like that. But at first, they weren't even part of this story. So the point is that only later did it come out this situation was a lot more complicated than it initially seemed, right? This is why this headline sounds this way, that these boys maybe weren't entirely to blame for what happened here. Let's look at a different headline. I was absolutely afraid. Indigenous elder on mob mentality of MAGA hat wearing students in D.C. Again, in this incident, this sort of story, it sounds a lot more like the boys are the aggressors again, right? They're referred to as being a mob. Again, it's mentioned that they're wearing MAGA hats, giving them kind of this aggressive impression that the previous headline does not, right? Let's look at a third headline of this same incident. The confrontation at the Lincoln Memorial, how an encounter between high school students and a Native American man became an explosive political moment. This one sounds to me more neutral than the other two, right? It's just a confrontation that happened. It's not blaming one group or the other, right? So the point is that you always have to investigate where information is coming from and if there might be some political bias going on which can be a little bit tricky.